Hey everyone, my name is Ajay, and part 5 we are going to discuss some of the basics, how to provision VMs, and how we can provision multiple NICs and access the internet. Going forward, we are going to discuss what is VNet, what is NSG, what is the load balancer, NAT gateway, firewall, and the public IP address. In my previous video, we have already seen what is called the VNet. So it's basically a network. You need to copy a couple of subnets from there, and all the resources which you are going to provision, they will be part of those subnets. Let's get started with provisioning a VM. So from Azure portal, from your subscription, go and create a virtual machine. If you have multiple subscription, you need to choose, but I have one, so it's coming by default. My resource group is AZ text, which we already created. And my virtual machine name, I have given Web1, WebNet, and VNet. So it means as a part of the initial, you can say this is my identification of the VM. This is part of the web network, and it is part of the VNet one. My region is going to be Asia Pacific Central India. Availability options I'm not going to choose. And I'm going to provision this VM with Windows Azure 2016 Data Center Generation 2. This is the size. This is my username. I need to type my passwords twice. And then inbound port rule. Either you can choose none or allow selected ports. So let's assume you have some sort of the VPN connectivity and don't want to access these VMs from the internet. Then you can choose the option none. Since I don't have any VPN provision and I need to access this VM from the internet, so I'm going to allow only RDP 3389 port. Then you are going to go to the next. In the next section, it is going to be the disk space. So OS disk type, I have chosen the premium SSD. However, you are going to have multiple options. If you want to go for the HDD, there's an option. My encryption type is going to be the REST. It means even if you're not using your data, it is protected on the storage side. Now let's go to the networking. If you click on the networking, these are the default option will pop up. Virtual network, it will ask whether you want to create new. If you already have the virtual network, you can define that. Subnet, it is a default subnet. Public IP, since I don't have any public IP provision, it is asking whether you want to create a new one or not. And this is the ACLs basically which protects your resources. So this is the NSG. I have chosen the basic. You have option to go for the none and you have option to go for the advanced. Public inbound port. You have option none or you allow a selected port. Let's hit the next button. This is my VNet 1 which I want to provision, and my subnet is going to be 10.10.10.0/24 and the name is going to be the web. My public IP, since I don't have the public IP, you can see there are two options. Either you want to allocate a public IP address to this VM, yes or no. If you don't, choose none. But in this case, since I don't have any alternate connectivity, I need to provision a public IP address. So I will go for the new option. My NSG group remains basic. My inbound port is allowed, which is 3389. In the management section, I'm not going to do anything, so I leave it to the default. Now you go for the advanced tagging, all those things, I left it to the default. Before hitting the create button, it is telling you this, the validation has been passed. Whatever the resources you want to provision, they are the correct. And this is going to be the charges occur. So 7.5648 INR per hour for this VM. Now let's hit the create button. After hitting the create button, you can see your deployment is in progress. It takes a couple of minutes. Once your deployment is completed, you can go to your resources. My virtual machine is ready, and under the overview, we can see the status is running. My location is Central India, and this is part of the Visual Studio Enterprise with MSDN subscription. I don't have any tag. This operating system is Windows running with the standard D2S V3, 2 vCPU, 8 gig of memory. This is a public IP address allocated by Azure, and this machine is part of the VNet 1, and the subnet is going to be the web. DNS is not configured, and the IP address assigned to this VM is 20.198.71.230. This is a private IP address. It's a dynamic range. So this is the first IP Azure can allocate to you. The first three IPs are going to be the reserved. Now we can see the publisher is Windows, Microsoft Windows Server. Operating system is Windows, and the generation is V2. So overall, it looks good. Let's go to network interface, which is attached to this device. So in our case, it is going to be Web1 WebNet VNet 1775. And what we can see here under the overview, the IP address, which is the private, it is going to be 10.10.10.4. And this is my public IP address, and it is attached to the host name what we have given to this VM. Under IP configuration of the same NIC, you can see the name of table is going to be ipconfig1. The type of IP is IPv4. This is the primary IP address, and this is the IP address which got dynamically assigned. Then you have a public IP address that is also dynamically assigned. My forwarding, IP forwarding on this host is disabled. However, you have an option to enable it as well. When you click on table ipconfig1, you can see you have option for public IP address. At any given time, you can deassociate as well. As of now, I need it to access the VM, hence the status is associated. And this is my public IP address, what we have seen. And then this is part of VNet web subnet, and the IP address assigned to this Nic card is 10.10.10.4. This is dynamic, and you are having an option if you want to make it static as well. Now coming back to the public IP address, if you click on the drop down, you can see an option basic, standard, dynamic, and static. Now let's talk about doing a static provisioning. So my public IP remains associated. However, I want to give a private IP address which remains same, but the mode should be static. So I need to hit the button static and click on save. There can be multiple scenarios if you want to configure multiple IP addresses on the same NIC card. So this is my VM, this is my NIC, and if I want to do a combination like this, I want to do two more IP allocated. One IP address is going to be the public IP address, and the private IP remains static. In the second table, I can add public IP address none, and private IP address is going to be static. So these are the options available for you, and you can add multiple IP addresses to the same NIC. So let's try to add IP address here. So this is my default configuration, what we have already configured so far. You can see the name is ipconfig1 and the type is IPv4, and this is my IP address and this is my public IP address. So let's hit the add button here, and this screen will pop up. I can give a name ipconfig2. My IP type is IPv4, and my private IP address setting is going to be the static. So I want to allocate the next available IP, which is going to be 10.10.10.5, and I want to add another public IP address. So state is going to be associate, and you cannot utilize the same IP address which we already used. So 230, if you're going to click on the 230 from this drop down, it is going to give you the error that this IP address is already associated. So you need to hit the new button, create new. In the create new, it is going to ask what is the name. So I have given a name web1 webnet vnet1 IP2, and the SKU type is basic. My assignment is static. Now hit the OK button and then click OK here. Since we already added the secondary IP address, let's verify how it looks on the Azure portal. So on the same NIC, I can go to the IP configuration. These are the two IP addresses what we can see. The first one is going to be the primary and the second IP is going to be the secondary. This was my static allocation, and this is my public IP address. My IP forwarding state remains disabled, and this is part of the same subnet. Let's verify what is allowed and what is not allowed. So under the same section, which is networking, you can see this is my Nic card, and this is my IP config1, which is the primary IP address, and it is going to allow only RDP. That is the rule we added. The rest of the things are going to be default one. Let's verify the routing table. So if you click on the effective routes, you can see I have one route, default route, which is added by the system, is pointing towards the internet, and the second is the virtual network. That is also default. Let's do the connectivity testing. So this was the public IP address which was allocated to me on the primary interface. And if I try to do the RDP to this IP address, it works. It is asking a username and password. There was a secondary IP address which we also allocated to the NIC as a secondary IP address. When I try to do the RDP, it fails. We will try to understand why it fails and how we can fix it. I'm inside the RDP session while using the primary IP address. When I go to the command prompt and hit the IP config, I can see only one IP is allocated, which is 10.4. Default gateway is 10.1, and I don't have secondary IP which we allocated coming here. Since we use the RDP to get into the box, I use the same IP address 20.198.71.230. To test the outbound, whether it takes the same IP address or not, you can go to what is my IP.org, and the IP address shown here is exactly the same. So inbound and outbound internet access, it is using the same IP address. Technically, whatever the IP address is what we allocate, we assume everything will be automated and Azure will take care of those IP assignment, and my guest OS will be ready with the secondary IP address. But that is not the case. So the secondary IP address what we allocated was not showing on the IP config, so we need to do some tweaks. So go to the Nic card property and choose the TCP IP IPv4. And here you need to add the primary IP address 10.10.10.4 with the default gateway of 1. And then go to the advanced, and from advanced you need to tell this guest OS that I also have a secondary IP address allocated to you, which is 10.10.10.5, and gateway is going to be the same because it's part of the same subnet, and the mask is 255.255.255.0, and hit the OK button. This time when I test my RDP connectivity, I'm able to connect my host on the secondary public IP address, which is 20.198.106.188. Now let's take a look on the IP config on the same host. Now we can see there's a secondary IP also got allocated. When I do the testing for outbound with what is my IP.org, it is still going to use my primary public IP address. We have already seen how to assign multiple IP addresses to the NIC. This time, let's talk about adding the new interface. So this is my virtual machine. I'm into the networking section. I can see this is my NIC, the first NIC, which comes by default. And I have an option which is grayed out, attach network interfaces. Till the time your machine is running, you won't be able to attach any additional network interfaces. So for that reason, I'm going to choose my virtual machine and hit a stop button. Once my machine is in stop mode, I can see this option is available for us to add Nic cards to the VMs. When you hit on create network interface, this is the default options going to pop up for you. So this resource group, it remains same. It is going to ask what is the name of the interface. It is also going to ask subnet, and then you need to choose the option what is the NSG group you are going to choose, and what are the public IP ports you are going to allow. Your assignment for private IP, you are going to have the option whether you want to go for the dynamic and static. As of now, we are not seeing any option to add any of the public IP address here. So let's try to provision it. So resource group remains same. I have given a name to this interface, which is web NIC2. So since this is a second NIC interface on web server, my subnet remains same, which is web. And I'm going to use the same NSG group what was allocated to the NIC1. So I'm going to use advanced option. The moment you hit on the advanced option, it is going to give you the option, and from the drop down you can see what is the NSG group you want to utilize for this NIC card. So I'm going to use, or I'm going to reuse the same NSG group what was on the NIC1. This time I'm going to use the static assignment for the private IP addresses, and the IP address I want to assign is 10.10.10.6. Now let's hit the create button. Now if we go to the networking section again on this virtual machine, I can see there are two NICs popping up. One is my primary and this one we added just now. Since we use the same NSG group, so you can see the rule remains same. I'm only going to allow a port 3389 from the public IP address point of view. Now let's analyze how the IP configuration looks like on the NIC2. So I have a name IP config 1, IPv4 is IP type, and this is the primary IP address, and the IP address is going to be 10.10.10.6. You see the public IP address is blank because so far we have not allocated any of the public IP address. Once you hit this table, you are going to get these options. You can choose from here. As of now, the state you can see the public IP address is deassociated. If you want to allocate a public IP address to this, go and choose the associate, and the assignment type is going to be static, or if you want to go for dynamic, you have that option as well. And this IP address is the private, and
On the public IP address point of view, the moment you hit the associate, it is going to ask what is the IP address you want to assign. If you're going to reuse any of the IP address, if they are already in use, it is going to throw you the error. So you go for the create new, and as we already discussed, private IP remains static and it is going to be 10.6. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.